Well, good morning, Sir Martin.
Good morning. Good morning, Joe.
I think we can say we are absolutely delighted to have you here, and
Delighted to be with you.
Wonderful. I thought we might start with some altitude, and I think that one of the benefits of having you here and sort of kicking this thing off is to give us context, right? You've sort of been not just living the fabric of advertising and media over a few decades here, but you've been in a lot of cases sort of the gravitational force that's sort of been driving it toward agility, toward technology, toward bringing art and science together. So I thought we'd take a little bit of advantage of that perspective to kind of ground us on where we are today. It does feel like a profound set of changes in regulation and sort of competition between the Googles and the Apples. In terms of TV becoming truly part of digital, north of 50% of every dollar being, digital, and so important to be able to, for a marketer to be able to connect to their consumers, in the medium that that we're all sort of in front of or that surround us. So, where are we? How does it feel right now in the market?
Well, it feels very good. I mean, we're going into a year of bounce back. 21 from a global GDP point of view will be up about 5 to 6%. The US maybe even stronger than that, 6 to 7% rebounding from last year. And next year looks set pretty fair too, around 4 to 5% global. Maybe the US around the same, maybe even a little bit stronger than that. So in the context of the pandemic, if anything good comes out of it, which one has to say very little, if any, does, the bounce back has been extraordinary, or we are in the process of an extraordinary bounce back. So I'm extremely bullish about this year and next year. I mean, even the holding companies, which are lumbering along, are managing to show a modicum of growth, not because they're really growing, but because of the bounce back from last year. I mean, if you've dropped your revenues last year by 10 to 15% in Q2, it's not within the bounds of possibilities that you'll recapture 10% of that, or maybe even 15%, so you're flat for 2 years. Now, that's very different to what you see in the digital marketplace, where S4 is, as you know, focused. We started 3 years ago with a clean sheet of paper, or a little bit less than that. And we had the fortune or the good luck to focus on digital at a time when you had secular tailwinds driving digital and digital growth. Digital last year was 50% of worldwide media spend of 500 to 550 billion. So about, call it 275, 300 billion, of course, dominated by Google at around 180, but you saw their blowout numbers last night. So that's now, they'll probably be doing about $250 billion this year, something like 240 at this rate. So they dominate. Facebook close behind them. We'll find out a little later today what Facebook have done. They're running at around 80 before tonight, and there goes Amazon at 20. So they dominate. If it's 275, 300, you've got almost 280 there between the big three in the Western economies. So you have that tailwind of digital transformation, that secular trend of digital growth, multiplied or magnified, accelerated by the pandemic. And then on top of that, you've got global GDP, as I said, increasing quite violently over 2 years. You made me sound like an old man, which I am. And I'd have to go back to the 1980s to find 2 consecutive years where GDP growth was at that sort of level. And then we had big inflation then. So in real terms, it wasn't anywhere near that. Now, we may get more inflation during this bounce back over the 2 years. Many people think we will. And if we do, I think that's probably good news actually for us, because our clients will have a little bit more pricing power, because at the moment they have none. So they focus on cost, or many of them focus on cost. They're not looking at the sky, they're looking at the boots. So all in all, Joe, I'm extremely optimistic. Where I get nervous is 23 onwards, because somebody at some point in time is going to have to pay for all this. I'm not saying that what was pumped into the economy was misspent or misdirected. It was needed. A Keynesian stimulus was needed in fiscal and monetary terms to get us out of the terrible fix we're in as a result of the pandemic. But this government spending has to be paid for in the form of higher taxation, and we'll hear from President Biden today on that. So we'll have to see what happens in terms of corporate tax, personal tax, capital gains tax, wealth tax, and whatever. But inevitably, an inequality has gone too far. That's one of the reasons for the rise of populism. And clearly, capital is a proportion of GDP, and labour as a proportion of GDP have been diverging since the 1980s and Reagan and Thatcher. That's when it started to go that way. And I think those trends have to be reversed just economically because of inequality and the consequences of that. But all in all, very positive for the next couple of years, with worry about what happens afterwards. There has to be a reckoning, I think, at some point in time, and I think we'll see that in 23.
There were at least two things in there that I thought might bring us one orbit in, and my earlier reference was not one of age, but of one of iconic status. So take that for what it's worth.
I don't know about that either, but anyway, an aging icon. I'm not sure I like that either.
No, maybe first, the marketing itself, right? There's sort of been a sort of a increasing trend and maybe an accelerating one toward, you talked about sort of marketers with head in the clouds or eyes on the ground in terms of sort of pricing power and whatnot, and obviously some of the traditional barriers that existed for corporations, have eroded in terms of, product development, product manufacturing, pick, pack, and ship, distribution, et cetera, right? So it's become much easier for sort of companies to get created and products and services to get there. It's not, P&G's not thinking Unilever; they're also thinking, hundreds or thousands of sort of DTCs, at every sort of individual line level. Marketing clearly is a, or if not the sort of differentiator in that environment. If a lot of the other moats have sort of been crossed, the role itself clearly you've talked a lot about the sort of the CMO and the duration of the role and whatnot.
Yeah.
How quick are the pressures mounting? Are you seeing a change in the dynamics of the marketing department, its centrality? Is it moving fast enough? A little bit of color there would be great.
Well, I think it has to change. I mean, even private equity. Steve Schwarzman, who's probably one of the most, if not the most successful private equity guy or whatever participant, said a few weeks ago that expressed some concern that the opportunities to cut costs had sort of were disappearing, and he worried about his ability to make returns. And I sent him a note saying, well, maybe you should hire us to help you generate top line growth. And I think that's the key. I mean, I quoted in the annual report, our annual report last year for S4 as our second report. And I said, I was talking to one CEO of a major packaged goods company. I asked him how he was. He said nothing that 100 basis points of organic growth couldn't solve. And I think, if you're running a packaged goods company where GDP, I mean, obviously if GDP is going up at 5 or 6%, it's a little bit easier. But if in 23, when we revert perhaps to the norm of 2 or 3% growth, which we really experienced since 2008, if you the old model was, if you grew your top line 2 or 3%, packaged goods company, you had very little pricing power, so you cut your costs, you bought back stock, you would increase your earnings by 0 to 5 or 5 to 10%, and kept the wolf from the door. You lasted 5 years as a CEO, so that was a decent legacy. Obviously, the pandemic blew a hole in that, and then really has accelerated the progress. Given more oxygen is being given to change agents with inside companies. We see that in many cases, and in fact, we get a foot in the door with many clients because change agents want to move quickly. So I do think the focus is changing, but I still don't think that revenue generation and organic growth or marketing or sales or whatever you want to call it plays big enough role. The balance, I'm an ex-CFO, and the balance shifted. It might have been that marketing was up here before 2008 and finance and procurement was down here, but the balance shifted, and you might even argue that procurement and finance is now superior. And in this type of environment, not a 5 to 6% growth rate in GDP, but when we revert to the norm of 2 to 3, which I think we will do in 2023, it just points out yet again the need to focus on growth and revenue growth. And I think there are sort of 3 areas that clients are focusing on at the moment. Firstly is they surrendered control to their outside advisors, agencies included. So they are, as Dominic Cummings, now the much maligned advisor to Boris Johnson, but once, at the pinnacle, when they ran the Brexit campaign and their theme was take back control. Well, that applies to clients too. They should be taking back control of their marketing functions. They surrendered too much. And then linked to that is the need for agility, because in a digitally dominated world, which we are now living in for the first time, this year will be the first year where digital is more than 50% of spend, and it is programmed or projected to increase to 70% by 2024 or 2026, certainly in the US and beyond. In that sort of world, agility, an always-on reaction, and always-on attitude is absolutely critical. So you have take back control. Did we move too many of our functions outside our control? Did we cut our costs? The worshipping at the altar of zero-based budgeting. Did we cut out not just too much innovation, but too much branding as well, and surrender it to outside advisors or not have it at all? So take that back. Number 2, we need agility. And then thirdly, touching on one of the things you mentioned, Joe, in the preamble, given what Apple and Google in particular are doing around privacy and crumbling, the cookie is crumbling or going away, the first-party data, the management of first-party data, and the incorporation into the marketing ecosystem, or however you want to describe it, is absolutely critical. So clients using first-party data in an effective way has become critically important. Hence the holding companies, running around trying to pick up. Well, they're picking up the wrong assets. They're picking up third-party data, which is not what you need. You need to work with and advise on first-party data and developing that. So I would say those 3 things: take back control, marketing becoming a more important function and a more balanced function with finance and procurement, agility, which is the number 1 corporate attribute. So many people we talk to are so frustrated by the inability of their organizations to pivot quickly. And thirdly, this focus on first-party data and working with the platforms. That's critically important.
So every one of those things, I think, deserves its own, deep dive, and we'll see how much time we're going to get in the actuals here. But I'd love to do it. So so let me again do a little bit of stage setting for the thrust here. So on one hand, you've got take back control, and clear sort of trend of need to understand what's going on, have to make sure that this sort of constellation of advisors of, technology, media, data, et cetera, are all sort of working to the same end. The sort of the telephone game or the sort of outsourcing of responsibility clearly at odds with, I think the trend and what you're saying in terms of what the marketing function and what, organizations need to focus on. Great. To some extent, the platforms, the direction that the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples are going are, directly at odds with that, right? If you kind of did the sort of the P&G wish list of what an ecosystem needs to look like, and it needs to be, fully transparent. It needs to, data needs to come in and come back out again. The sense that you don't want to rent your access to your customer, but you want to create a durable relationship to the customer, by means of the media that they consume, right? The first party relationship on, on both sides. The confidence in the metrics. That the metrics are in fact relevant to what the business is trying to drive, as opposed to sort of self-reported. How do you resolve the conflict? How do you resolve the, on one hand, impact control, on the other hand, seeding more of it?
I don't see it as a conflict. I mean, I think, when I was at WPP, and I think they still suffer from this, there was this sort of antagonism. It was the phrase frenemy. Mm-hmm. Which was coined actually by somebody who worked with me, a woman who went to Harvard Business School, actually, Lauren Rees, and she was the one who came up with it. We used it mercilessly, and I think it was wrong, because I think effectively the platforms partner with the agencies. I mean, clients are not dumb about this. They understand that the platforms are media, they are publishers. This is the very first canned debate that I ever did was
platforms or publisher.
There were 4 tech platforms. Nikesh Arora was there from Google, and Yahoo was there, and I think Microsoft and some one other. And my first question, doing the job you're doing, was, are you a publisher, or a tech company, or are you a media company? And they all answered tech company. I said, no, you're a media company. And look, I think clients are not silly. They understand that. And the issue is, how do you strain out the positives and the negatives? Because, there is a lot of concerns in a lot of areas. I mean, the one that's top of everybody's mind at the moment is privacy. And what Google and Apple have done, I think, is quite cleverly preempted the privacy debate. They looked at what was happening, for example, in Australia. They were worried that it might spread elsewhere, Canada, France, wherever. I mean, there was a skirmish in France. I think it got solved by Google paying for news snippets. But I think they cleverly anticipated that, and they preempted the move, and they preempted the concern that consumers have, and agencies have, and clients have about privacy, brand safety, interference elections, and everything. And now you now have a situation, well, you've got a tussle going on between Apple and Facebook in the privacy area. But I think coming back to the heart of the question, or the answer, is that you have to work. These platforms are powerful. Look at Google's results. We'll see Facebook's results tonight. I've no doubt that Amazon will make further progress. I mean, look at Google now. I think I mentioned this before. Their revenue, their ad revenues, or their total revenues, will go from 180 to 240 billion. So
that's it.
$1 trillion. So this year, if they carry on at that rate, up a third in a quarter. I mean, even the fact that some recovery. Don't forget, this quarter was not the full lockdown quarter. It's Q2 where you see the full
real impact. Yeah,
lockdowns last year. You began to see it in March of last year, really, in the US, maybe January and February in Asia. So I really think you have to get it in a bit of perspective. We work with the platforms. I always, when we go to market, as faster, better, cheaper. Faster is about agility, I already talked about. Better is about understanding what Google, what Facebook, what Amazon, what Tencent, what Alibaba, what TikTok, what Apple, what Microsoft, what Adobe, Salesforce, Oracle, IBM, SAP, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, Netflix, Spotify, LG, Samsung, Xiaomi, JD.com, Epic, what all these companies, and you go on, and there are others, Kalshu. I mean, all these, what are these companies doing? What are their relative merits and strengths? How, you know, Snap has a 66% growth quarter. What does that mean? They have a capital markets day where they say they're going to grow by 50% a year for the next 5 years. Pinterest wobbles a bit. What do all these things mean? And I don't think, you know, that you're right. I mean, there are clients, and I think P&G is one, who look at things very differently. And interestingly, Mark Pritchard has reinvented P&G marketing in the last couple of years. I mean, around 1.2, 1.3 billion consumer profiles, more in housing on content, more in housing on media, more focus on agility and responsiveness. And we've seen that in the work that we do for them. So I think, you know, the clients are changing, but you've got to look at it. You know, we look at it not really as a, you know, the marketing press and the analysts said the reason the holding companies got into trouble was because of competition with Google and Facebook. That is patent nonsense. Google and Facebook are their biggest clients, yep, and their biggest media partner. They've supplanted the traditional media owners, whether it be, you know, a Disney or a Fox or a Viacom or a CBS or whatever it happens to be. They have been supplanted by the new digital media companies, but you have to look at them in exactly the same way as you looked at the traditional media owners. You work with them, with your clients, to try and secure the best results, with all the imperfections that you alluded to. You know, lack of transparency, measurement, all these things. What you have to do is to refine it, because you'd be like King Canute and the waves. We know the direction in which this is going. You know, the problem the holding companies have, for all their blathering about how digital they are, the fact is, even if they're 40% digital, which some of them claim to be, even if they're not, 60% of their business is traditional, and that's what weighs them down. And the simple fact of the matter is, that's the way that everything's going. And you can't be King Canute. You can't stick your throne in the waves and think that the water is not going to lap over your feet. It's going to drown you.
Yeah, there's something interesting there. It's almost a could be a refreshing, you know, mental model where media is media, right? And the job of a marketer and their agent or agencies or marketing services firms, right, is to organize those in ways that kind of deliver results. And some of them there is translation necessary from sort of the kind of the local rules inside of a Google versus one inside of an Alibaba, and how you basically, to your point, find the right balance in order to create what ultimately is I think a long-term trend for the marketing department, going back to that point of less a spender of money and more sort of a driver results, right, where the alignment comes with procurement and finance to be like, yeah, no, I know that I can put $1 in and I can get 4 out, right? And I think that's sort of the long-term trend. There's something in the and I imagine the easy answer is higher S4, but the moving those forces and trying to create that alignment. I mean, that is a little bit, maybe bringing it to the programmatic pioneers audience here. I've often sort of thought, hey, one of the kind of allures and sort of the willingness to accept some of the trade-offs and some of the the need to translate the sort of the goals and the approaches inside of a media property, whether it's big as Google or a local news publisher, is how do you create a framework? How do you create a standard? How do you, sort of align those things in a way that is, more sort of templatized? And I think one of the big challenges, and I would love your sort of response to this, is, especially with the large ones, where the needs of the Fortune 2000 aren't necessarily the needs of the sum of the 10 million other small and mid-sized.
But that's the thing that I think. Well, it's an interesting point. If you look at the big platforms, and this is true of the three big Western ones, and it's true of the three big Eastern ones, Alibaba, Tencent,
great,
TikTok. They are all six are engines. I mean, this is the Facebook argument in their newspaper campaign against Apple, which is the right argument. They are the engine of small business. I mean, Jack Ma now, who's lost his crown because of what's happened in China around Ant Financial and elsewhere. Jack Ma was the champion of the Chinese entrepreneur. Alibaba was the platform which a Chinese entrepreneur would use, in his mind, not just in China, but beyond China, to sell goods and services. And that's Facebook's argument, quite rightly, because it's interesting, neither Google nor Facebook nor Amazon really give the data on what proportion of their revenues come from small and medium-sized businesses. But during the pandemic, which one has to emphasize, the pandemic, as I said before, has accelerated digital transformation at a consumer level, at a media level, and at an enterprise level. Those platforms were the saviors of small and medium-sized businesses. I know some people guffaw at that, but it's the truth. If you had a small and medium-sized business in the teeth of the pandemic and you had no distribution, what the hell could you do but use e-commerce and online delivery, online marketing and delivery and distribution as an alternative? Now, it's just speeded up something that was going to happen anyway. But, I think, again, I come back to Canute and the wage. These are unstoppable forces. We then get into the big arguments about, are these companies too big? They're 2 trillion. Google's approaching 2 trillion in terms of market cap. I think going through 1 trillion was a seminal event. I remember Lloyd Blankfein, I think it was, who used to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, was asked, what happens when one of these companies go to 2 trillion? When I think it was Apple or Microsoft have gone through 1, and he said something to the effect that no company will go to 2 trillion because no nation state would allow it to happen. Because, you think about GDPs, 2 trillion is getting to the size of a Spain or an Italy or a France or the UK, not quite, but getting towards it. So if market cap equals GDP, these are nation states. So do they have too much power? But that's a different set of questions. What it's telling you, and what the results from the tech companies so far in this season are telling you, these are unstoppable trends. S4 is a royalty on the growth, as you'll see next Tuesday, is a royalty on the growth of these platforms. And it's inevitable, in my view, that they continue to grow. Then it's up to the regulator to decide whether that's a good or bad thing. And I think what's going to happen is that it probably will be more difficult for the big platforms to acquire growth. That some of the congressional testimony that we heard around acquisition activities was not great, and that the FTC or whoever would or the DOJ would raise objections to further expansion through acquisition, but organic growth remains unchecked. So if they are capable of devising new products, new services, gaining territory, they will continue to do so. So I think, look, you go with it, and you develop relationships with the platforms intensively, and you build those relationships. You try and refine all the issues and deal with all the issues that people are concerned about, whether it be privacy, measurement, whatever, and you work with them in a concerted way to improve the products and the services.
Maybe one last question, I think, in interest of getting to the remainder of the program here. The water metaphor has struck me throughout this in terms of unstoppable forces and waves crashing over and sort of longer term trends. I realize that I'm something in my nature, perhaps as an entrepreneur, as a stubborn attempt to change the reality. Think about this group of people, and like at least one of their jobs. I think about the programmatic, audience as unglamorously, plumbers, right? Like trying to channel some of these unstoppable forces. So it's not about damming them up. But it's about how do you channel those things to meet the needs of your company or your client or what have you, and at least one of the sort of one of the roles. So there's a group of people here, a bunch of things going on out in the world. Many of the trend lines, to your point, pandemic and otherwise, simply accelerating, right? If you were to give folks some motivation to get out there and to pick something, to pick a thing to emphasize and focus on, to begin to channel some of these things in ways that you weren't sort of leaning back and waiting, but you were like, no, I think we can make a big move around creative and personalization and improving the customer experience. I think that measurement and attribution is the area of focus, right? As opposed to how we target and how we optimize. Like, what would you want people coming out of here being like, yeah, I'm going to go make that happen?
Well, I don't want to tell you what we're planning to do, but let me give you a historic example. About 2 years ago, when we first got together with Mighty Hive, so December of 18, we were heavily obviously into programmatic, and then we got into performance, and then we started to look at this was really before. Well, it actually probably was a little bit before Google issued their first blog, which was January of 2020. Everybody sort of reacted to the second blog a few weeks ago. It was a bit of a nonsense, really, because everybody knew that third-party cookies were going to disappear. But we first knew about it in January. I think it was January of 2020. Well, we before that even, we started to think about data and analytics and how we would build a network. And we had a good data and analytics capability in the US. We wanted to do it quickly, so it had to be done by through mergers, as we call them. We don't call them acquisitions, because we ask people to join us in our mission of establishing a new model and disrupting the old. And within about a period of 6 to 9 months, we built through deals, through probably 4 or 5 deals. ConversionWorks, Bright Blue, Digadat, Lens 10, Datalicious in Korea, Datalicious in Australia. We built a data and analytics network to supplement what we had in the US, which enabled us to attack, one of the areas that's the obvious one, which is how do you develop first-party data sources? How do you merge them? How do you deal with different systems? If you're a client who's grown by acquisition, well, even if you've grown organically, you have different CMOs or CIOs or CTOs got different systems, and you have to meld them all together into one. So it's often a real dog's breakfast, and it's easy to talk about and difficult to do, and there's very heavy cost involved. It may be not a cash cost, because these may be systems that you're writing off, but it is
normalization.
It's sort of, and what's interesting about the pandemic is that Q2 of last year blew a hole in profitability. Many companies, their profits were down by 50% for the quarter, so they didn't feel quite so badly about taking a hit. You see that the ad holding companies, they took massive provisions on terminating people. Forrester said they're going to terminate 50,000 people last year and throwing out surplus property. The same thing applied to data, to software and antiquated data systems. So, that's a good example, in my view, of what you can do. You know, even if you're facing these mastodons, these huge companies that that are growing, you know, even faster as a result of the pandemic and these secular trends that are being reinforced by the pandemic and the rebound. There are massive opportunities. And you touched on, you know, you said whether it be measurement or attribution or, you know, we're seeing huge changes take place as we see spending, you know, break through the 50% mark for digital and on to 70, 75 within a couple of years. And that's the prime driver. I mean, we, for one, are going to have to figure out, you know, when digital has really got to a very strong position, we will have to figure out what is going to be the next. You know, we're already heavily into AR, into VR, into voice. I mean, all these areas are areas that we think, you know, we set up this studio in New Delhi around the Epic's Unreal Engine, you know, which enables us to create and produce content anywhere in the world, you know, almost by flipping a switch. So, you know, there are some really exciting things that you can do if you analyze them. I don't think you throw up your hands and say, and inevitably, you know, the American economy is so vibrant. American entrepreneurs are so strong. They're intellectually so powerful. The capital resources are huge. You know, if you have a good idea, you can get it done. And so I think you will see and continue to see tremendous innovation and thoughtfulness around these big changes. You know, I reeled off 20 or so companies. There will be new ones. Yep. Within those 20, there are new ones. There will be new ones. I mean, there is an argument that the power of some of these companies is so great that they, you know, suppress. I was listening to, was it Chris Hughes, one of the founders of Facebook, making that suggestion that innovation has been suppressed by these giants. I'm not quite sure I buy that completely, but I, you know, understand to some extent where he's coming from.
I think that's the point. I think the fact that you made that sort of demarcation from, you know, first 50% to the next 50% of digital. And if you thought of all of this work over the past, you know, 20 plus years being lead up, this sort of immature evolution of the, you know, the industry, digital data, technology, quantification of marketing, and now the, you know, the reattachment to the art and the, you know, the brand and sort of connecting all of those dots. If you just thought about this second half as the second half, and it's the beginning of the next wave, and you think to yourself, like, what are the innovations that are, you know, yet to come? You know, there should be some real motivation. It's both. Well,
we're seeing some tremendously interesting things happening around virtual reality. They've been accelerated by the pandemic, the sort of work we've done with the NBA and Verizon, etc. And, you know, in the sports field, you know, to create sort of virtual events. And I think, you know, that's all been accelerated by the pandemic. So I think there are tremendous opportunities, and we'll see tremendous evolution of these things over time.
Martin, could not have appreciated this more. Personally, I can speak for, I'm sure, everyone that's listening to say this was awesome, and I am really excited.
You're easily awed.
You know, the second wave. I think it's time for the second wave.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much.